This is the girl's first day staying at her uncle's house. The harsh aunt immediately orders her to do farm labor, arranging for her to live in a foul-smelling pigsty, where she spends every day surrounded by livestock. But the girl had been used to a life of wealth and comfort, and had never endured such cruel treatment.
Nicht alles auf einmal so.
She once had a twin sister, and the two of them shared a happy childhood in their hometown in Germany. But fate is unpredictable, and as their parents passed away one after another due to illness, their lives began to change. So two relatives decided to take them in. One was an uncle living in the countryside, and the other was an aunt settled in the Netherlands. Because the uncle's family was poor, they were eager to take the healthier older sister Anna, so she could serve as labor for the household. Meanwhile, the middle class aunt had no choice but to adopt Lotte, who suffered from a lung disease. And just like that, these inseparable twin sisters were torn apart by their relatives, forced onto completely different paths in life. Not long after, Lotte followed her aunt to the Netherlands. Her uncle by marriage was a middle-class intellectual, and he even had a special heated room built for Lotte to treat her illness, treating her as if she were his own daughter. But what no one expected was that her sister Anna lived a completely different life. In a poor Catholic family, Anna had practically become a servant. Her aunt forced all the dirty and exhausting chores onto her frail shoulders. Every night when she finally got to rest, Anna would take out the photograph of the two sisters, and under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, she would draw comfort from those beautiful memories. Sometimes, after finishing her work, Anna would try to write letters to Lotte, but she only knew that her sister had gone to the Netherlands, and had no idea where exactly she was. Meanwhile, under her aunt's careful care, Lotte's health was gradually improving. She also tried to write to her sister, and although she did not know the address, her aunt did know where those distant relatives lived, and even secretly read Lotte's letter. When she asked her husband whether the letter should be sent, he hesitated.
Dan wil ze er naartoe, als ze beter is. En dan houden ze haar. Domme boeren. Domme katholieke boeren. Wil je dan dat ze daar opgroeit? Ze moet Anna vergeten.
Differences in family values and gaps in social class led to the letter being deliberately withheld. At its core, this was driven by a desire for control and concerns about social status. Perhaps they hoped that Lotte would completely separate from Anna, free from the burden of their poor and backward German relatives, so she could fully integrate into a more respectable future. On the other side, Anna not only managed the household but also served as her aunt's maid. Although she lived a life filled with silent suffering, she endured it all, hoping only to receive a letter from her sister as soon as possible. But in the eyes of her aunt, who had long foreseen everything, she would never receive a letter from Lotte.
Die Lotte will nichts mehr von dir wissen. Die findet, dass du stinkst nach Scheiße. Die findet dich dumm und schmutzig. Außerdem ist sie tot.
Such cruel words about her own sister made it impossible for Anna to continue serving her. So the girl ran outside with all her strength, stopping before a statue of the Virgin Mary nearby, praying for her sister's recovery and hoping to receive a letter soon. And far away, Lotte felt the same longing. That bond between close family, thicker than blood, led her to call out her sister's name many times in the depths of the night. But her aunt began to instill frightening ideas.
Anna woont bij de barbaren. Dat zijn hele domme mensen. Die hebben geen postpapier. En daarom komen er nooit brieven. Maar dat geeft niet. Want Anna is heel gelukkig bij de barbaren. Ze heeft het daar fijn.
Using words to reject their ties to their German relatives, no matter what, Lotte had indeed found a sense of home. Her aunt treated her like her own daughter, not only curing her illness, but also giving her a warm little home in these chaotic times, which was already more than enough. As if guided by something unseen, her sister seemed to sense Lotte's call, and began to feel that living in a hay shed was unbearably filthy. So she went to her aunt's room, hoping to borrow the kitchen to heat some water and wash away the dirt from her body. But her aunt only responded with a suspicious sneer, because in the impoverished countryside, everyone was used to scraping by, and suddenly caring about cleanliness felt unsettling. Yet Anna used her small, tender hands to boil a pot of hot water for herself. One day, a clergyman came to visit the house, and upon seeing Anna working, he asked why she was not attending school. But the girl's aunt quietly told the priest that Anna had some intellectual problems. The priest did not seem to believe it, and thought the girl looked quite clever, and the truth was exactly that. When Anna saw the book in the priest's hand, she took it without hesitation and began to read aloud flawlessly. At that time, very few girls were literate, and in a poor family like this, it made the priest even more suspicious. And just like that, 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Anna grew from a strong little girl into a graceful young woman, yet her situation remained unchanged. Far away in the Netherlands, unlike Anna's stagnant life, Lotte's adoptive parents provided her with every material comfort. At the same time, her adoptive father had a well-off friend come to visit. The friend's eldest son was well-educated, and upon seeing the talented and beautiful Lotte, he seemed to develop a subtle affection for her, approaching her while playing the piano and whispering sweet words. Meanwhile, Anna also fell in love with a decent young man, but he was a blacksmith. When she saw a newspaper placed in front of her, Anna immediately became interested, because society was on the verge of change, and the man featured in the newspaper was someone who sought to save the lower classes from suffering and fight against poverty. Even the blacksmith wanted to join this movement, but when Anna returned home and handed the newspaper to her uncle, things took an unpredictable turn. First of all, her uncle did not approve of her relationship with the blacksmith, because he controlled Anna's life and wanted her to obey him completely, refusing to let her gain freedom through marriage. On the other hand, the ruling power was placing national ideology above religion, gradually suppressing the influence of the Catholic Church and promoting a cult of personality. As a devout Catholic, her uncle saw this as a desecration of faith. But in truth, Anna did not listen to her uncle, and went to meet the blacksmith at the entrance of the village. By then, he had already put on a uniform and joined the new regime, and in public, he took Anna's hand, hoping she would join him. However, just as the two drew close, a woman from the village saw their intimate interaction. This would prove disastrous, so Anna quickly declined the blacksmith's offer, and while he stood there confused, she hurried back home. Little did she know, the moment she stepped into the yard, she saw the gossiping woman whispering something to her aunt. Clearly, everything had been exposed. At the same time, her uncle stepped out as well. The girl who had been feeding the pigs suddenly realized that her own uncle was standing right behind her, having been told that she was in a relationship with a boy from the village. His anger reached its peak. He used her deceased father as an excuse to restrict Anna's freedom. This was nothing more than using selfish obsession to disguise control, interfering in her life in the name of the dead, turning what was claimed to be protection into a blade that harmed them both. At this moment, Anna had already been beaten unconscious. Her aunt stood by and watched, neither stopping her husband's actions nor checking on Anna's injuries, fully exposing the darkest side of human nature. Most ironically, before leaving, she even kissed her own child. The scene shifts. It is said that twins share a mysterious bond. Far away in the Netherlands, Lotte was out sailing with her new boyfriend. Feeling a sudden wave of sadness, she wanted to jump into the sea for a swim, but became entangled in a fishing net beneath the water. However, just as she struggled free from the entanglement, she seemed to see her sister's figure sinking in the distance, and quickly broke through the surface of the water. Amid her boyfriend's anxious shouts, she barely managed to swim back to the sailboat. At the same moment, in different places, she seemed to share an extraordinary connection with her sister in Germany.
Tweeling uit elkaar halen, dat is gewoon misdadig.
Ik heb zoveel brieven geschreven.
Dus ze schreef nooit terug. Waarom ga je niet naar naartoe?
Ze heeft nooit iets laten horen.
Zal ik met je meegaan?
David, daar mag je niet over praten.
Ja, waarom niet?
Ik heb het je verteld. Nu moet je het weer vergeten.
Although the two sisters had been separated for more than 10 years, and despite writing nearly 100 letters without ever receiving a reply, Lotte had gradually grown disappointed. Moreover, her adoptive parents had always instilled the idea of cutting off contact, so her sense of familial bonds slowly faded over time. But she never imagined that her sister Anna was living through a living nightmare. At this time, the priest who had once shown concern for her heard about the girl's mistreatment and came to visit her. There is warmth to be found even in this world. When poor Anna had fallen into despair, it was the priest who reached out a helping hand and took her into a boarding school. This was the education Anna had always longed for, and she never expected her wish to come true in such a way. And so, as autumn turned to winter, 3 more years passed in the blink of an eye. Anna successfully completed her studies at the boarding school. At this time, World War II had broken out, and the streets of Berlin were filled with the presence of Nazi forces. With nowhere else to go, Anna first found work in the city as a maid, but the lady of the house seemed rather strict, as even after Anna had just cleaned the floors, she was still deemed unsatisfactory. Such nitpicking demands felt excessive, but since she was dependent on others, she could only endure and comply. Meanwhile, Lotte's life remained unchanged. as she spent her days with her boyfriend, enjoying a comfortable middle-class life. But while helping her boyfriend look through some books, she accidentally discovered a white box. Curious, Lotte opened it. What she found inside left her frozen in shock. The more than 100 letters she had written to her sister had never been sent, and had all been kept by her adoptive parents. When the truth was revealed, her aunt broke down in tears, unable to face the mistake she had made. At the same time, her husband returned home from work. Seeing the table covered with letters, he immediately understood everything that had happened.
Al die brieven. Zusje, dat doe je toch niet?
Je weet niet waarover je het hebt.
Waar zijn haar brieven? Hebben jullie die soms maar helemaal weggegooid?
Er is helemaal nooit een brief gekomen.
Waarom niet?
The reason Lotte had never received any reply from her sister was because her adoptive parents never intended to let the other side know where she lived, wanting instead to cut ties with their poor relatives, including the unfortunate Anna.
Ze heeft al die tijd gewacht op een brief van mij. Wie doet dit? Waarom? Leg het me dan uit!
Wij hebben jou gered. Van een stel analfabete barbaren.
Dan hebben jullie haar niet ook gered.
Jij was ziek!
To forcibly sever the bond between twin sisters was truly too cruel, but upon reflection, it was also their careful care that cured Lotte's lung disease and gave her a second life, making them like parents who had given birth to her anew. So she should be grateful, but she also needed to find her sister. The scene shifts. Two unexpected visitors arrived at the house where Anna worked. Just as she was heading out to buy groceries, it turned out they were from a department concerned with hereditary health. Acting under orders to find a girl named Anna, Anna did not reveal her identity at first, but invited them inside, wanting to understand what was happening. However, what no one expected was that even after 3 years, her uncle and aunt still held a grudge, reporting Anna as someone with intellectual disabilities.
Anna Bamberg schwachsinnig?
Es steht hier schwarz auf weiß in der Vormundschaftsakte.
Anna Bamberg, Pflegetochter von Heinrich und Martha Bamberg, ist schwachsinnig und von schwacher Gesundheit, sodass sie an einer schulischen Ausbildung nicht teilnehmen kann. Leider ist sie so schwach,
Dass sie die zu Hause behalten musste und so weiter. Bitte, reden Sie sich auch selbst.
When Anna read the document, it was indeed testimony from her uncle and aunt, and her body trembled uncontrollably. She then threw the document back at them and admitted that she was the person they were looking for.
Ich bin das zerbrechliche, schwachsinnige Mädchen, das Sie suchen. Ich konnte seit meinem 6. Lebensjahr lesen und schreiben. Mein Onkel hat mich zu Hause behalten, dass ich für ihn arbeite, bei den Schweinen, für nichts. Er hat jahrelang zugesehen, wie mich seine Frau terrorisiert hat. Er hat mich verprügelt und niemand ist gekommen und hat gefragt, was er jahrelang in die Formulare geschrieben hat. Und jetzt wollen Sie mich sterilisieren lassen? Ich habe die Nase gestrichen voll. Raus!
Entschuldigung.
Unable to control her emotions, Anna shouted them out of the house, and in her suppressed rage, smashed the lady's vase. At that very moment, the lady returned home and saw her beloved vase shattered across the floor, her heart breaking along with it. All Anna could do now was resign from her position, so the girl left with her suitcase. On her way out, she ran into a mailman delivering letters. Even as they parted ways, the lady could not resist humiliating Anna one last time, but while sorting through the letters, she discovered one addressed to Anna. The lady still had a trace of kindness, and quickly ran after Anna to hand her the letter. To her astonishment, the letter had come from the Netherlands.
Liebe Zusje, das ist mein erster Brief an dich, aber auch mein 100. Ich schreibe dir das mit aufgeregtem Herzen, denn ich denke, liebe Anna, dass wir uns, du und ich, bald wiedersehen werden. Ich habe dich gefunden.
Du lebst also noch. Lotte, welche Überraschung. 100-mal habe ich mich gefragt, warum du nicht schreibst. Wir wurden beide betrogen.
A new light dawned on her life. After 13 years, the twin sisters bound by blood were finally about to reunite through letters. At this time, Anna had also found a new job, working as a governess in the home of a wealthy countess. With her education and her beauty, she was deeply favored by the lady of the house. Meanwhile, Lotte was preparing to depart for Germany. Before leaving, her adoptive father did not even say goodbye, because he had no desire to associate with poor relatives. But Lotte's boyfriend was very supportive, even purchasing a ring as a symbol of their eternal love. And so, after several days of travel, Lotte finally arrived in Germany from the Netherlands. At this time, World War II had just broken out, so the station was filled with soldiers, which made Lotte, arriving in a foreign land for the first time, feel uneasy. However, at that very moment, an anxious girl in the distance seemed to spot her.
Lotte!
Even though they had not seen each other for 13 years, and everything had long since changed, the bond carved into their very bones could never be erased. So Lotte immediately picked up her suitcase and walked toward her sister Anna. They gazed at each other, searching for the familiar traces that time could not take away. Then, arm in arm, the two sisters boarded a private car provided by the Countess and returned together to the villa where Anna lived. But Anna reminded her that she could only stay for one night, because the next day she would follow the Countess to the eastern region to avoid the bombings overhead. When they arrived, the villa was busy preparing for a private party, with important officials invited as guests, and all the servants were bustling about. Soon after, Anna brought her sister to her room. They should have had so much to say, but as the bell rang at the door, Anna had to join in preparing dinner. Although she was a governess, when distinguished guests arrived, she also had to take on the role of a servant. In order to stay by her sister's side, Lotte changed into a servant's outfit as well. Cherishing this hard-won reunion, it had to be said that although they were twins, having been raised in families of completely different social classes, their temperaments and appearances had grown quite different. As they were about to go downstairs, they happened to see the Countess's two daughters playing, and in that moment, it felt as if they were looking at their younger selves. Those beautiful memories could never be erased, and it was this very belief that brought them back together today. Soon, it was time to serve the officers at dinner. Some of them, upon seeing the pretty maids, behaved inappropriately. Lotte clearly felt uncomfortable with this, and Anna felt the same. But these men were influential figures and honored guests of the Countess, so they could only endure the discomfort. At the same time, the singing of a high-ranking officer made Lotte deeply uneasy. Because her adoptive father and her boyfriend were both Jewish, the hostility in the lyrics stirred anger in her heart for the first time. As midnight approached, the sisters finally lay down to rest. At that moment, Lotte took out a gift from her suitcase, a gift heavy with meaning. When Anna eagerly opened it, she discovered that it contained the 100 unsent letters her sister had written.
So viele. Du brauchst sie nicht jetzt zu lesen. Dumme Kinderbriefe.
Wenn ich die alle bekommen hätte.
That longing for reunion had always been deeply imprinted in Lotte's heart. No matter how her adoptive parents tried to separate them, her original intention had never changed. At the same time, Lotte hoped that Anna would go with her to the Netherlands, where there was no war, no chaos, and where they could stay together forever. But Anna hesitated, because the Countess relied heavily on her, and leaving now would feel like betraying the kindness she had once received. So Anna promised her sister that after the Countess's family settled in the East, she would find the right moment to resign, no later than 3 weeks, and then go to the Netherlands to reunite with her. But could things truly turn out as they wished? In the morning, as the Countess saw off her guests, the servants also began preparing for the move, and it was time for Lotte to leave. Before departing, she still offered a few words to her sister. She said, "Your future is not decided by that woman. This is your life." Anna replied, "I will leave soon. I want to see everyone, including your fiancé." At the mention of Lotte's fiancé, she immediately became excited, quickly taking out his photograph from her bag to show her sister. But unexpectedly, Anna let out a hesitant, cold laugh. "He is Jewish." This seemingly casual remark instantly changed Lotte's expression, and even altered how she saw Anna. Having grown up in poverty and under the influence of Nazi ideology, Anna carried a kind of passively absorbed prejudice. In contrast, Lotte had grown up in a relatively free and open environment, with a deeper and more inclusive understanding of humanity. She was not bound by a single ideology, and could see beyond identity and labels to the shared desires and vulnerabilities within every soul. As a result, a deep divide existed between their worldviews, and when Lotte left, she did not even look back. Not long after, Anna followed the Countess to the eastern region. It was the same kind of grand estate, yet in the Countess's eyes, it was far from satisfactory. The place had 45 rooms and had once been the residence of Kaiser Wilhelm, but it had been abandoned for too long and was covered in dust. So the Countess expected Anna to help manage it. But at that moment, Anna made a request. She wanted to go to the Netherlands. The Countess refused outright. Even with hundreds of servants, it was still far from enough to meet the needs of the estate. And they even brought in a large number of prisoners of war from Poland to help renovate the castle. This was the life of the wealthy. Even during wartime, it was something ordinary people could hardly imagine. After being forbidden to go to the Netherlands, Anna wrote a letter to her sister, expressing her helplessness.
Unter diesen Umständen erscheint es mir am besten, dass du nicht hierher kommst. Dein Land ist im Krieg. Besser nicht.
Anna, wir gehen. Ist was mit deiner Schwester? Ich habe keine Schwester.
Her sister's reply made Anna seem to realize something, and their relationship dropped to freezing point. That night, at a ball held in the estate, everyone else was enjoying themselves, while Anna hid in a corner, refusing every invitation from the soldiers. At that moment, a handsome young man in the crowd stared at her intently. Both of them seemed equally lonely, so they began to dance together, holding a bottle of wine. But in the middle of it, Anna suddenly ran away from the crowd, because she could not move on from her sister's cold letter, and she did not even know what she had done wrong. A wave of deep grievance and confusion overwhelmed her like a tide. At that moment, the young man she had just met offered her gentle care and comfort, giving Anna a brief moment of warmth in the cold night. Compared to her sister, Lotte seemed to have returned to her previous state, no longer dwelling on her relationship with Anna, but as the roar of planes filled the sky, even the Netherlands, a neutral country, was suddenly invaded by German forces. Despite knowing the situation was dangerous, Lotte still dragged her fiancé out for a trip. By the lakeside, the two of them began to undress, as Lotte wanted to give herself to him in that moment. After all, in times of war, no one could predict whether they would live to see tomorrow. But David was a traditional man, believing that such precious things should be saved for their wedding day. This led to a disagreement between them. Lotte, who had always been pampered, actually threw away the engagement ring David had given her. Yet her fiancé did not get angry.
Waarom maak jij het niet uit?
Waarom zou het?
Omdat ik Duits ben natuurlijk.
Lotte was a German by blood, but her people were carrying out brutal persecution against Jews. From the very beginning of the war, an unbridgeable gap had already formed between them. She feared that her fiancé would see her differently, so Lotte felt inferior and believed their love would not last. But she underestimated his clarity and devotion. What David cared about was Lotte's pure heart. And so, to ease her worries, on that small boat, they gave themselves to each other. However, the good times did not last long. One day, after having coffee together, Lotte and her boyfriend planned to go to the theater to watch an opera. But just then, she realized she had left her bag behind at the cafe. Even though the performance was about to begin, David did not hesitate to go back and retrieve it for her. That moment became their last sweetness frozen in time. Once David left, he never came back. Only after the theater audience had dispersed, and she saw people running through the streets, did Lotte realize something was wrong. She immediately rushed toward the cafe, but the place was already empty, clearly having just gone through a raid. And that was indeed the truth. Through investigation by David's parents, it was discovered that he had been taken to a place called Buchenwald. The notice clearly stated that it was a camp established by Germany to detain Jewish people. At that time, no one fully understood what such a place truly was. They still believed that David would be released after some time of labor.
Zoals dingen kunnen lopen. Als jij je tas niet had laten staan.
One sentence from David's mother made Lotte deeply realize that her identity as a German would always carry a certain perception in the eyes of Jewish people, a reality that could not be erased. In order to save her fiancé, after 2 years of no contact, Lotte once again wrote a letter to her sister in Germany.
Bitte vergib mir, Anna, dass ich so lange nichts von mir hören ließ. Wir sind hier alle verwirrt und durcheinander. Aber ich denke viel an dich. Hilf mir. David wurde nach Buchenwald gebracht. Es ist meine Schuld. Weißt du, was in Buchenwald ist?
Meanwhile, compared to her sister's situation, Anna was entering a peak in her romantic life. Since meeting that soldier, the two had begun seeing each other frequently, and whenever she missed him deeply, she would even climb up the wall of the camp just to watch him training in the yard. She seemed to have forgotten the rift between her and her sister. Finally, one day, Anna received a surprise from her boyfriend. He needed to stop in Vienna for a period of rest before heading to the Soviet front, so he hoped Anna would come to Vienna and complete their wedding together. Even the Countess was happy for her, and even prepared a decent outfit for her. After saying goodbye to the people at the estate, Anna immediately set off for Vienna. However, at this critical moment, her sister's letter also arrived. The chance for reconciliation was missed. Meanwhile, as the situation for Jewish people in the Netherlands worsened, David's parents hoped to stay at Lotte's home to avoid persecution, but Lotte's adoptive father appeared cold and indifferent. In theory, he should have felt more sympathy and connection, but under the pressure of survival, he instead revealed selfishness and avoidance. This showed that the era had not only destroyed external lives, but also shattered trust and unity within human nature. However, thanks to Latte's efforts, the family was allowed to stay, because she felt a sense of guilt toward her fiancé. At that moment, a gunshot suddenly rang out from outside. After checking the situation, everyone hurried to clear the table and prepare to hide, but Latte's adoptive father did not seem afraid. Then Latte went outside alone to see what was happening, and indeed saw several German soldiers, while observing from the shadows. It turned out that the soldiers were merely hunting rabbits and posed no threat. On the contrary, since Anna was also German and spoke fluent German, the soldiers were delighted to meet someone from their homeland. Before leaving, they even exchanged warm blessings, allowing the hidden Jewish family to avoid this crisis. But fate is unpredictable. Not long after, a letter arrived at the house, not from her sister Anna, but from David.
Ich nicht schnell mein Segelschiff bekomme, dann ist es zu spät, David. Hij roept om hulp.
Auschwitz, nu weer in Auschwitz.
Schatz. Wat zo. Ik wil dat doen.
Auschwitz was notorious as a living hell, and no Jewish person was known to come out alive. This made Latte's guilt even more unbearable. As she locked herself in her room and cried uncontrollably, the scene shifts. Anna and her boyfriend stepped into marriage. In that sacred hall, they exchanged rings, and under the priest's prayers, they officially became husband and wife. Life is always so dramatic. While the younger sister struggled through the days after losing her fiancé, the older sister was experiencing the sweetness of newlywed life. The next day, they even took many photographs, preserving their happiness forever, because her husband was about to head to the Soviet front, and no one knew when they would meet again. In fact, whether they would ever meet again remained unknown. After seeing her husband off, Anna lingered, unwilling to leave. She feared losing him, and even more, she feared that this newly found happiness would be crushed by the brutality of war. She planned to buy flowers to decorate their new home, but suddenly air raid sirens echoed through the sky, accompanied by enemy planes circling above. People fled the streets in panic, and a frightened Anna hurried back home. What awaited her was even more devastating. Her in-laws stood there with sorrowful faces, forced to deliver tragic news to their new daughter-in-law. A package had been sent from her husband's unit on the battlefield, containing all of his belongings, along with a letter from the commanding officer.
Liebe Frau Rosali, als Kompaniechef habe ich die Pflicht, Sie vom Heldentod Ihres Mannes zu benachrichtigen. In der Eifel. Granatfeuer.
The wedding ring on her finger still seemed to reflect the memory of him smiling and saying, "Wait for me to come back." But in that moment, all those beautiful hopes were shattered. Anna wanted to leave Germany with her suitcase and gather the courage to find her twin sister in the Netherlands. But when she reached a bridge and saw the raging river below, she stopped. The river symbolized the insurmountable divide between the sisters. Although she longed to reunite with Latte, she was still burdened by insecurity and hesitation. She was poor, of low status, and living in Nazi Germany, while Latte had grown up in a wealthy Jewish family and lived a respectable life in the free Netherlands. She feared rejection, or that she would not be able to fit into her sister's life. The rushing river was not only a physical barrier, but also a symbol of psychological and historical distance. Anna stopping on the bridge represented how fear, insecurity, and the tide of the times held her back. At that moment, the appearance of American soldiers nearby signaled that the war in Germany was coming to an end. Meanwhile, far away in the Netherlands, Latte's life was far from easy, since both families had been living together. Even food had become scarce, with only a spoonful of cornmeal each day. This left Latte's adoptive father dissatisfied.
Het hoe langer hoe meer op water te lijken. Krijg je niet meer.
But his complaints were deliberately spoken aloud for others to hear. When Latte, unable to bear seeing him hungry, went to bring him food, she discovered that he was secretly eating alone. It turned out that while he appeared righteous on the surface, he was committing selfish acts behind the scenes. Using the resistance against oppression as a cover, he sought personal gain. This was something Latte found hard to accept. But in such chaotic times, without self-preservation, survival itself became uncertain. Latte demanded that her adoptive father hand over all the ration coupons, or she would expose him for who he really was. In anger, he lashed out, saying that her problem was that she would always remain a savage. Those harsh words caused Latte to collapse on the spot. Not long after, the war finally came to an end. Both families were able to welcome this moment of victory, but Latte stayed aside, lost in thought, still hoping that David would return safely. Yet her fiancé had already died in the camp, and just like that, 2 years passed. Lotte had a daughter. After letting go of her past with her fiancé, she married his younger brother, bringing a sense of closure to a long and complicated chapter of her life. But today was a special day, because her sister from Germany had come, following the address from their letters.
Kan ik je helpen, meisje?
Ja, kunnen Sie mir vielleicht sagen, wo die Grüße
Ja,
zijn?
de pleur is een mof. Je hoorde dat lekker op, jij.
This was the scar left by war. Even after 2 years, Germans were still not welcomed in the Netherlands. Finally, Anna arrived at her sister's home. When the two sisters met again, there should have been so much to say, but reality was completely different from what they had imagined. Faced with Anna's warm greeting, Lotte was at first surprised, then quickly turned cold. In the end, it was her husband who broke the silence, yet Lotte's eyes were still filled with resentment, leaving Anna at a loss, because her fiancé had died at the hands of the Nazis. Even though Anna was also German, Lotte now fully identified as Dutch, even abandoning her native language. Her heart was filled only with hatred toward the Nazis, and even toward her own sister. So Lotte walked into the inner room, refusing to see her again. Her husband, however, was understanding, urging her to let go of the past. After all, not every German was a Nazi, and there are good and bad people everywhere. These words seemed to stir something within Lotte. When she returned to the living room to face her sister again, there was at least a faint smile on her face, but she only brought the child over. Perhaps time was needed to heal the broken relationship. Then, Lotte's husband took Anna to the music studio outside, introducing his work and giving Lotte some space. At that moment, Lotte noticed that inside Anna's suitcase, the 100 letters were still carefully kept. This showed that Anna still cared deeply for her. There was also a handkerchief left behind by their mother. All of this seemed to suggest that it was time to forgive her sister, but unexpectedly, she found a wedding photograph in the suitcase. Her sister had married a Nazi soldier. Seeing the photograph of her deceased fiancé, hatred surged within her once again. Everything collapsed.
Verdwijn uit mijn leven. Ik wil je niet meer zien. Lotte, nooit meer. Je bent mijn zus niet meer.
Lotte drove Anna out of the house. This symbolized that the divide created by war was stronger than blood ties. The wounds of history made it impossible for their bond to be repaired. Even 50 years later, although the two sisters could meet again, and Anna tried to tell her about her suffering, Lotte still could not let go because of that one fact. One day, while walking together in the mountains, they reached a canyon and became lost. By nightfall, they still had not found their way out, and could only sit down and spend the night there. In the cold darkness of the night, Anna, as the older sister, seemed to return to their childhood, caring for Lotte with warmth and tenderness. When morning came, Lotte woke up to find that Anna had passed away. At that moment, Lotte's children arrived, and only then did they learn that their mother had a twin sister.
Wie is deze vrouw? Anna. Mijn zusje. Mijn tweelingzusje.
And with that, the story comes to an end. The twin, a pair of twin sisters whose fate was torn apart by class and war. Anna struggled through poverty and oppression, while Lotte grew up amid comfort and control. The same bloodline, yet completely different paths. The film delicately portrays how family bonds are distorted by control, class prejudice, and the flames of war. Those 100 unsent letters represent the cruel suppression of personal emotion by the times. More profoundly, it reveals how war sweeps ordinary people into the tide of ideology, the prejudice Anna passively absorbed, and the forced transformation of Lotte, are both marks left by history upon human nature. Their reunion without reconciliation is not only a family tragedy, but also a complete destruction of human connection caused by war. Their lives are like reflections trembling in the flames of conflict, revealing the helplessness of individuals within grand narratives. And the call of blood that never faded became the most sorrowful echo of an era in turmoil.